What is the fate of evil and oppressive world systems? Today we're taking a look at Revelation chapter 17 and 18 and doing an overview of them. I'd encourage you to read them for yourself. So in chapter 17 and 18, we have the description of this woman and the beast, and she is a representation of evil and oppressive city. And it's a very colorful chapter. I'd encourage you to read it. And we see, though, that the Lamb of God, Jesus himself, comes in and destroys the city. So let's take a closer look at some of the elements here. In verse 6, it says, I saw the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. Now, I totally am with you there that this is completely gross. But what John is trying to illustrate here is that this city, this system was evil. Now, we're going to describe why I think this later, but I believe that the first readers of Revelation would have no problem identifying the woman as Rome. And so we can remember that Rome had a thirst for blood, right? This arena entertainment with the gladiators. And those forced to fight to the death were criminals, slaves, but many, many Christians were put there. And not long before Revelation was written was Nero, who was one of the most sadistic emperors in Roman history and who killed Christians for pleasure. Now, verse 8 describes the beast, and this is just really interesting. And it says that the beast once was, now is not, and yet will come again. And this is just like one of those places where John uses language in a really interesting way. And so the language here mimics what's said about the Lamb in chapter 1 and chapter 2. And it's this intentional parody about how eternal God is. And it contrasts it with the beast. And then in verse 8 it says that he will go to his destruction. And here we see that even though the beast puts on a good show and might look like he will win the day, we recognize that even though evil is real and persistent, that there's no doubt about its ultimate fate. It will go to its destruction. So here's why I think that the original readers would have immediately recognized the woman as Rome. And so in verse 9, it says that she sits on 7 hills. And then in verse 18, it says that it refers to her as the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. And so the original readers would have immediately thought of Rome by these references because it was common knowledge that the original city of Rome sat on 7 hills. And then in John's day, they would have recognized that reference of reigning over other kings to mean Rome. That doesn't mean, though, that this city or this evil couldn't have other symbolic meanings or be applied in different ways. That's just what the original readers would have recognized. Let's take a look at verse 14 because it's really great. It says, they will make war, that is the woman and the beast, they will make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them, because he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Remember, even though evil looks powerful, there's no doubt about its ultimate demise by Jesus. He will overcome and be victorious. So let's move on to chapter 18. So John says this city will come to its demise. It will be overtaken by Jesus. And then we come to chapter 18, and chapter 18 is essentially a prophetic funeral dirge over the city. And it follows Old Testament models. Old Testament models often pronounced an event as done, even though it had yet to be fulfilled. It's kind of interesting to note that ancient writers often showed off their rhetorical skills by praising important cities. And John sort of uses that here in chapter 18, but then contrasts it. He praises the city's power and wealth, but in a way that condemns the city. And so he writes this funeral eulogy for a city that curses instead of blesses. And that's essentially almost all of chapter 18 is this kind of funeral dirge that condemns the city. This is really interesting. Craig Keener, I'm going to quote here, he's the author of the Bible Background Commentary, and this is what he says. It's difficult for us to catch the impact today. So we see a condemned and probably aged prophet confined to an island for defying the whims of the mightiest empire the Mediterranean or Middle Eastern world has ever known. And he prophesies that empire's destruction. Yet, the faith that he proclaims has now spread throughout the world, and Rome has been fallen for more than 15 centuries. No one in John's time would have predicted the fall of Rome. And yet, John did. And it happened. But the faith that John was condemned for and exiled on Patmos for still lives on. So although Babylon, the city here in chapter 18, and the woman in chapter 17 stood for Rome in John's day, other embodiments of oppressive world system has certainly risen and fallen since then. So I believe these chapters, Revelation 17 and 18, should remind us that although it may appear as though evil is winning the day on earth, it really is Jesus who wins the ultimate victory.